around the theme of New Jersey leading the way on climate change solutions. My name is Marjorie Kaplan. I'm the Associate Director of the Rutgers Climate Institute, and along with my colleague Jean Herb of the Rutgers Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy, I co-facilitate the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance. Kicking off its 10th year, the Alliance is a statewide network of over 50 diverse organizations committed to advancing evidence-based, nonpartisan climate change strategies at the state and local levels in New Jersey. We work within and across sectors. We've produced more than 50 reports on topics ranging from what people, places, and assets are most vulnerable to climate change, and why, and what are policy gaps and options, best practices, and climate projections for New Jersey, including the first Science and Technical Advisory Panel on Sea Level Rise for New Jersey. We provide accessible communication materials and convenings like today's, and we've spearheaded the development of decision support tools on climate change for New Jersey. We owe a debt of gratitude to Governors Thomas Kean and James Florio, who have lent their support to the Alliance since it formed in 2011. In addition to Rutgers University, we'd like to thank today's sponsors, including the Energy Foundation, Bayshore Recycling, PSEG, the New Jersey Clean Energy Program, Mazer Consulting, and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Before I turn it over for our first session, a few instructions about this workshop. Other than today's presenters, you are all muted. So to communicate with us, please type your questions into the chat box. To find the chat box, you would hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen. A series of circles should be displayed. There's one circle that looks like a dialog bubble. If you click that, the chat will come up, and you can type your questions and your thoughts there. Since this is a workshop, we want to hear from you. Even if we can't get to all of your questions, we welcome them and we welcome your thoughts. Please avail yourself of the chat box throughout today's presentation, and please be certain to type into the All Panelists box. I also want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and it will be available on the Alliance website at njadapt.rutgers.edu. Now it's my privilege to invite one of the Alliance's co-chairs, Gary Sonnemeyer, the Vice President of Operations at Bayshore Recycling. I'd like to invite Gary to turn on his camera and microphone to moderate our first session.
Thank you very much, Marjorie, and welcome to all once again. It looks like we have an outstanding turnout for today's program. We have 330 pre-registered. It looks like we're over 200 so far, with folks perhaps joining a little bit late. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today for our discussion. I'm sure everyone participating today understands the gravity of climate change, and without question, it is the challenge of our times, and we must collectively rise to meet that. For our part in New Jersey, we are most fortunate to have very strong leadership on the climate change front between our existing legislative framework and renewed focus from Governor Murphy's administration with Executive Orders 89 and 100, with Administrative Order from DEP 2020-01, major updates to our Energy Master Plan, and a wealth of technical studies which set the stage for concerted action. We are most fortunate today to have senior leadership participating in our first panel with DEP Commissioner Catherine McCabe and BPU President Joe Fiordaliso, who will provide us with the state climate policy update. Please feel free to type questions into the All Panelists sections of the chat box after both our distinguished speakers have presented. We also want you to know we think this and are treating this as a true workshop, so we'll be sharing your chat and feedback with all the speakers today. So at this time, we're going to skip formal introductions. In the interest of time, we have a very ambitious program today. I'm going to pray that we have no information technology gremlins lurking out there today, and I'm going to invite Commissioner McCabe to now turn on her camera and microphone to share her screen. And Commissioner, if you don't mind, please say hello, so we make sure everything is working.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and want to very, very sincerely thank you for taking time to join us today and provide a policy update for the exciting yet daunting climate agenda that I know you're managing for the governor and for the state. So thank you, and Commissioner, it's all yours.
Thank you. Let me ask before I begin if my assistant, Jess Sponikel, has the slides to put up. Jess, are you there, and do you have the slides up?
They're up and we can see them.
Great, thank you. So it's good afternoon and good to see you all, although we're all seeing each other only momentarily on this first day of National Hispanic Heritage Month. So thank you for inviting me and my colleague, BPU President Joe Fiordaliso, to talk to you about what I agree is the greatest environmental challenge of our time, climate change. As you know, under Governor Phil Murphy, we have many irons in the fire to help us address this challenge, both by reducing New Jersey's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions and by building our resilience and our ability to adapt to the changes that we already see and here in New Jersey and that we know are coming. I am also pleased to be joined today by my Deputy Commissioner and Chief of Staff, Sean LaTourette, who's leading our efforts to develop the changes in DEP's regulations that are needed to respond to climate change. You may also have seen the news that we have a new Deputy Commissioner at DEP, Olivia Glenn. Olivia will be focusing on working with communities and leading our environmental justice efforts. And this is a very exciting moment for EJ with the legislature's passage of a new bill that will enable DEP to consider environmental justice in DEP's permitting processes for certain types of facilities like waste incinerators that have been disproportionately located in vulnerable communities. So Jess, flipping to slide 2 in our climate change topic. This is a menu of the many initiatives that we have underway in state government under Executive Order 89 and Executive Order 100. As was mentioned, we have several things to talk to you about, and of course also the Energy Master Plan, which I think was Executive Order number 28, the Global Warming Response Act, which has been with us since 2007, but renewed and amended last year, RGGI, the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and Offshore Wind. Flipping to slide 3. This is a very busy slide, shows you how very, very busy we are. These are the many, many parts that you will see of the things that we are working on. You can see with Executive Order 89 there in the beginning that we've got, as you know, the science, as you probably do know, the scientific report on climate change that has already been issued. And let me see if I have anything more detailed to show you on that one. Jess, if you could switch over to slide number 5, please. Slide 5 shows the cover page for the scientific report on climate change, which is a very comprehensive report containing in-depth details that are important to many different sectors. But it also has a great short executive summary that highlights what everyone needs to know about the climate change science in New Jersey. So if you have not read that yet, I would urge you to do it. It's posted on DEP's website. Going back up, Jess, if you would, back up to slide 3, the timeline of DEP's initiatives. This timeline shows you that we've got 2 aspects of the work going on. One we call mitigation, which is the important work of trying to slow climate change down by doing New Jersey's share of reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. And aspect number 2, of course, is the resilience and adaptation that is needed in our own state. The key purpose of all these mitigation efforts, of course, is to reach Governor Murphy's goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. And the Global Warming Response Act goal of reducing GHG emissions by 80%, that's below the 2006 baseline, by 2050. As you know, all of that work is going to take quite a big lift, but our commitment to clean energy will not only help us fight climate change by reducing our emissions, it will also spur on new industries and innovation for the state, as we're already seeing, hopefully making New Jersey a national leader in the growing clean energy sector. So how do we go about doing all of this? So let's flip off that busy page and break out a part of it over on slide 4, please, Jess. Okay. Looking at the first steps here, we had a Chief Resilience Officer for the state appointed back in 2019, and EO, the Executive Order 89, was signed, which directed DEP to develop that very comprehensive scientific report on climate change. So this is not all new science, though some of it is quite new, but it collects in one place the best available science on what's happening and what's projected for climate change in New Jersey. And that report was issued on June 30th. And I want to say that we are extremely fortunate in New Jersey to have world-class scientists at Rutgers, as well as other universities, who've done cutting-edge scientific research on regional as well as the global climate change efforts, or effects rather, and projections. And unfortunately for us, the news and the projections are not terribly rosy. The science indicates that temperatures and sea levels are rising faster here than in other parts of the country. And new information from the melting of the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, I think there was even more new information on that this morning, shows us that sea levels are rising more quickly than originally projected. And the best experts project sea level rise of between 1.5 to 2 feet by 2050 in New Jersey, and 3 to 5 feet or more by 2100. So it's important for us to recognize, as all of you may be aware, that the 2050 sea level rise is already baked in. It's unavoidable, no matter what aggressive greenhouse gas reduction measures we and the rest of the world take, because that will be the effect. Those are the projected sea rise levels from the effects of the greenhouse gases that we have already emitted into our atmosphere. So quite clearly, there is an urgent need for action to slow this down, and most critically for New Jersey to begin the work of adaptation now. So under Executive Order 89, as I mentioned, Dave Rosenblatt was appointed the state's chief resilience officer. Dave also is the assistant commissioner for DEP's Office of Climate and Flood Resilience. And Dave is particularly well suited to lead this effort because he has he's been leading the state's coastal resilience efforts for years and has a very professional and a realistic approach about what needs to be done to build our resilience and what is practical to achieve with the resources that are available and the social challenges that we must overcome, as we all recognize. Considerable work has already been done under Dave's guidance for the Coastal Resiliency Plan that is called for by Executive Order 89. And the executive order also created an interagency council on climate resilience, which is comprised of 16 state agencies that have frontline responsibilities for dealing with the effects of climate change. And that council is charged with developing a statewide climate resilience strategy, which we hope to be able to issue by the end of the year. We will admit that COVID has us a little bit later on that than we had hoped. This will have to be a dynamic strategy, though, to be revised as we go forward, and experience and new scientific research teaches us more about what climate change has in store for New Jersey and how quickly. Flipping again just to slide 5, the scientific report on climate change. In addition to the sea level rise projections, this report shows us that we can also expect historically unprecedented warming in this century, up by 4 to 5.7 degrees by 2050, which will result in longer and more frequent heat waves that impact larger geographic areas. This is of particular concern for our vulnerable populations in urban areas in New Jersey, where the well-known urban heat island effect will be intensified. So we need to plan for more cooling shelters, and if we're wise, to plant more trees in urban areas to help keep these temperatures down. Wildfire seasons are expected to lengthen and/or become more intense as a result of the hot, dry periods, as the current wildfires in California are dramatically illustrating. We have quite a tinderbox ourselves here in New Jersey in the Pine Barrens, which is a very precious but vulnerable resource in our state. Climate change will also increase our extreme weather and flooding in the inland areas along New Jersey's many streams and rivers. And in addition to the impacts on the health of all New Jerseyans, both the temperature increases and the flooding also will impact our agriculture, our forests, and our wildlife, as we are already seeing. So if there was any denial and uncertainty left out there before, the scientific report on climate change in New Jersey now should leave no New Jerseyan in doubt of just what we're up against and the need for urgent action to change our ways and begin adapting to the future in front of us. Turn to slide 6, please, Jess. So New Jersey Pact, what is that? That is an acronym. We love acronyms in the government for our regulations to protect against climate threats. In January, Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 100, directing DEP to undertake a regulatory reform effort to update our air quality and our environmental land use regulations to incorporate our expanding knowledge about climate change. There are, of course, two aspects to this: mitigation, in order to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation to prepare us to adapt to the climate changes that are already here and that we know are coming. Moving to slide 7, Jess. Not quite as busy as the original slide of all activities, but this is the timetable for our New Jersey Pact rulemaking effort. Got off to a fast start early this year with the issuance of Administrative Order 2020-01 to start the rulemaking process simultaneously with the issuance of the governor's executive order, losing not one day. We did the rule launch for the process back in February, and despite the challenges of the COVID pandemic, we have continued stakeholder sessions in virtual meeting format to get that critically needed early input from all stakeholder sectors. We expect to complete this stakeholdering process soon and are beginning the rule formulation and writing process. The draft rule proposals for the mitigation side, we expect should be ready by the end of the first quarter of next year, with the land use proposals to follow later in the year, potentially June, we're targeting. On the mitigation side, we're working on two main rules. One is a monitoring and reporting rule, which is required by the Global Warming Response Act amendments of 2019 to gather additional data that is needed to better inform the state's climate inventory and our future reduction strategies to meet New Jersey's 2050 goals. So that rule will primarily focus on gathering additional information about three areas: hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs from large-scale refrigeration systems, methane emissions from wastewater treatment plants and landfills, and local gas utility leak detection monitoring. These are three areas that we don't have enough information now to give us the planning base that we need to have as we move forward. The second set of regulations will be new air pollution regulations designed to reduce CO2 emissions from in-state sources to help us achieve the Global Warming Response Act goal of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050, our famous 80 by 50 goal. We have already received quite a bit of feedback from various stakeholders on our initial thoughts for this proposed rule. We call that the climate pollutant reduction rule, by the way. Those initial thoughts focused on reducing emissions from the stationary sources that are already regulated by the DEP. But in response to the feedback that we got, we are reevaluating the scope of that rulemaking to consider including additional stationary sources that are not currently regulated and mobile sources. So we held two additional stakeholder meetings this month to discuss stationary sources. That was on September 3rd, and mobile sources on September 10th. And we have one more session tomorrow, which will particularly focus on emissions from ports and their particular mobile sources. On the adaptation side, we are looking at a very large swath of our land use regulations: flood hazard, coastal, wetlands, and stormwater, all of which need to incorporate climate change considerations such as sea level rise. This obviously is critical to allow the state and our communities to increase the resilience of our structures by taking common sense and cost-effective measures, such as avoiding flood-prone areas, reestablishing some of our chronically inundated wetlands, revegetating riparian areas, and encouraging green building and green infrastructure. And to ensure that the state leads by example, we will also be reviewing projects built with public funds to confirm that they integrate climate resilience measures, so we can be sure that taxpayer dollars are put to good use and the infrastructure we build provides lasting value for this changing world of ours. Flipping to slide 8, please, Jess. I won't spend too much time here in order to not to steal any thunder from my partner, President Fiordaliso. But as you know, the Energy Master Plan is key to all of our plans for dealing with climate change. And one of the governor's earliest executive orders, number 28, directed the BPU, in cooperation with DEP and other agencies, to update the state's energy master plan to set out the strategic pathway for New Jersey to achieve the governor's goal of achieving 100% carbon neutral electric generation by 2050. And that plan was issued, I believe it was last December. Just a note here, we traditionally have thought of the energy sector in New Jersey as the power generation and transmission sector, electrical power, since we don't produce oil or gas or mine coal here in New Jersey that I know of. But this plan also, this EMP revision also includes the transportation sector, recognizing that our transportation systems both use a huge amount of energy in the form of fossil fuel. Apologies for that. And in fact, are now the largest contributor to the state's greenhouse gas emissions. So as we take steps to electrify our transportation sector to reduce these carbon emissions, we must plan at the same time for the large increase in the demand on our electrical power sector. So we've got to be looking in every corner here. And accordingly, as you see on slide 9, I'm not going to go through the details of these strategies here, but there are 7 strategies in the Energy Master Plan that include 6 energy portfolio pathways to meet our 100% clean energy goal, featuring electrification of the transportation sector, a vast expansion in the generation and use of renewable energy and distributed energy resources, of course, maximizing our energy efficiency and conservation and reducing peak demand, and importantly and challengingly, reducing energy consumption and emissions from the building sector. So leaving any more about the Energy Master Plan to Joe, please go to slide 10, Jess. The Global Warming Response Act, squarely in DEP's corner, to produce this report. On slide 10, you see the rough timeline for this, that it is due now, basically. I think we had hoped to get it out earlier than the year. Like other things, that's been slightly delayed by COVID, but we are ready, almost ready to issue it. It'll likely be coming out in October, within a few weeks now, we hope. Going over to slide 11, please, Jess. Of course, the whole purpose of the Global Warming Response Act report is to meet that guideline that the legislature set back in 2007 of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from the 2006 baseline by 2050. When we did meet the 2020 interim reduction target, that was largely through the conversion of our electrical generation sector from oil and coal fired to natural gas. But the lift to meet the 2050 goal is going to require a lot more of us, as the Energy Master Plan makes clear. When the legislature passed and Governor Murphy signed the updated Global Warming Response Act, they required the DEP to adopt rules and regulations establishing the monitoring and reporting program, the GHG, for GHGs that I mentioned, and also to prepare this report on the current levels of greenhouse gas emissions and the progress that we've made towards compliance with that 80-50 goal. So as this report comes out, you'll see that it also will outline the opportunities and DEP's recommendations. There are many things we can do to achieve that 80 by 50 goal, all in alignment with the analysis and recommendations of the Energy Master Plan. But there will be quite a wealth of detail there, and I'm sure that you will all be interested in at least reviewing the executive summary of that report when it comes out. It is going to go in depth into a number of different sectors, some of which will interest different stakeholders, but everyone should be conversant with the executive summary so that you can see the overview of the details of what we need to do to get to that 80 by 50 goal. Moving over to slide 12, please, Jess. Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. As you all know, the governor sent us immediately back into negotiating to rejoin RGGI, which we did in 2019, and we joined our first auction in January. We have now brought in, with our third quarter auction that we just finished, we now have almost $68 million that we've received from this. In fact, we received more in the last auction than we had expected. We'd gotten $20 million each of the first 2 quarters. third quarter brought 25 million. So we are doing even better than we expected. And switching to slide 13, I think we're up to, Jess. We have the RGGI strategic funding plan that the DEP and our partners at the BPU and the EDA put out to ensure that we invest the RGGI proceeds in programs and projects that will give us a big step up in achieving our electrification goals. And we also agreed, as you'll see reflected in that funding plan, to target that funding to benefit particularly our environmental justice communities. The RGGI funding initiatives will fund 4 initiatives during the first 3-year funding cycle, and that will be devoted to programs that fall within the general scopes of catalyzing clean and equitable transportation. This will involve accelerating transition to electric transportation throughout the state. So sorry about that. I'm not very good at shushing my devices here. With a particular focus on our environmental justice communities. We can't just electrify the vehicles that wealthy people can drive, but we need to make sure that our environmental justice communities receive the early benefits of that switch to electric transportation. The second part of this effort and the strategic funding plan is to promote blue carbon in coastal habitats and to enhance forests and as well as urban forests. These initiatives will focus on protecting and enhancing the state's natural resources, which are already giving us, I think, about 8% reduction in by sequestration of carbon in our net emissions of greenhouse gases every year. And we want to make sure that we keep that up and strengthen those natural resources that we are so lucky to have here in New Jersey. And finally, the RGGI strategic plan calls for the creation of a New Jersey Green Bank, which is a very, very important tool to help us drive improved energy efficiency and renewable energy uses in all the sectors, the industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors that will need assistance as we try to ramp up all of these efforts to reduce the carbon content of our energy. You can find more information on the strategic funding plan on DEP's website. It happens to be listed on that slide, also very easy to find by just going into DEP's general website. And flipping to the last slide, Jess, number 14. Again, I won't steal President Fiordaliso's thunder because this is offshore wind. This is the timeline on offshore wind, which you're all probably familiar with. Our goal now under Executive Order 92, up from the previous 3,500 megawatt commitment, is now 7,500 megawatts by 2035. And that under that plan, we project at this point that the offshore wind will be able to provide 23% of electricity to customers statewide by 2050. While building this industry, of course, we need to be very mindful and careful about protecting our environmental and natural resources, as well as the commercial and recreational fisheries that make a huge contribution to the state's economy and are incredibly important to those coastal communities. So that's where DEP role is primarily focused, is in protecting the natural resources as we get this new important industry underway off our shores. And they recently issued a draft offshore wind strategic plan, which I hope you will all take the time to read, promises to deliver us clean, renewable energy that will help us meet the state's 50% renewable energy goal by 2030 and the 100% clean energy goal by 2050. And it will also help New Jersey to become a hub for the fast-growing sector of wind energy, for which we hope to be a leader not only in the region, but in the country. So in conclusion, I remain steadfast in my belief that a strong partnership between DEP and all of our in-state government partners and in the private sector will enable us all to rise together to this very, very serious challenge of preparing ourselves for a future of resilience, of environmental equity, and a thriving and sustainable economy that will enable all of our people to lead healthy and productive lives. And we welcome all of you and very much appreciate your collaboration and support to help make this the future of our beautiful Garden State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that terrific overview of that busy slide. I'm surprised you could actually fit it on one slide. It's such a daunting task and so many tasks that you need to undertake. But thank you for your laser focus, which is obvious on behalf of the governor and the department to face these challenges. So at this time, we're going to bring you back in a little bit for some questions. But for now, if you don't mind, please turn off your camera and your audio, and I'm going to invite President Fiordaliso, if you could please turn on your video and your microphone. President? All right, sir, how are you? Great to see you today. Thank you very much for joining us, and I have to thank you for the incredible service you've given the state and the Board of Public Utilities for so many years. I think it's 15 years or so you've been with the board, and we thank you very, very much. And at this time, please take it away, and I'm going to jump off.
Thank you very much. It's so good to be here with all of you, and I want to welcome our virtual audience as well as our panel made up of some of New Jersey's most passionate advocates. Thank you all for being here. I am always so honored to be invited to events like this. It gives me an opportunity to speak to the choir, and because you're always going to find friendly faces. I want to thank my colleague and my friend, Commissioner McCabe, who, as you can tell, has kept up the momentum at DEP in pressing environmental issues through some of the hardest months we'll see in our lifetime. And it just gets a little bit weirder every single day for some reason, doesn't it? That's the thing about public service. It's our duty, our responsibility to keep working even when the going gets tough. Even when so many fail to accept the science that demands urgent, underline urgent action now to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. As the Commissioner indicated, the one single primary issue of our lifetime is before us. Despite a federal government that flatly denies this reality, New Jersey and many of our sister states remain ardent in our pursuit of clean energy. New Jersey remains in particular a leader on the course to lower harmful emissions, create jobs, improve residents' health, and make our state stronger and fairer for all. How can we accomplish this? Well, I submit there are two words: clean energy. And you might be wondering, for those of you who don't know, well, how did the Board of Public Utilities, which is a regulatory body, oversees all investment-owned utilities, whether it's electric, gas, water, telecommunications, whatever it may be, whatever we regulate, become so involved in clean energy? Well, back in 1999, the state legislature designated the Board of Public Utilities as the Clean Energy Office for the state of New Jersey. And the president of the board, which happens to be me currently, as the Chief Energy Officer for the state of New Jersey. We are taking and have taken this responsibility very seriously. And as my colleague indicated, it is a pressing problem that if we don't take immediate action, future generations of New Jerseyans, my grandchildren, your grandchildren, and subsequent generations after that are going to face a traumatic, life-altering change in their lifestyle. We are seeing the catastrophic effects of climate change today. From orange inferno skies in California to shattered heat index records, rampant algae blooms, and sunny day flooding right here in the state of New Jersey. We're already paying the price for past environmental ills, and we have a lot of catching up to do. And we cannot expect any assistance, financially or otherwise, from a federal government who continues to deny the existence of climate change. It's the states like New Jersey that will propel, eventually, a national program for clean energy and 100% clean energy. And I hope that's in our lifetime. Temperatures and sea level, as Commissioner McCabe indicated, are rising faster in New Jersey than most other places. That's why Governor Murphy has wasted no time in doing the heavy lifting of decarbonizing our energy sector. The governor was the first to campaign on 100% clean energy. He has held true to the promise every day since he took office. I'm sure many of our panelists and much of our audience is familiar, as Commissioner McCabe indicated, with the Energy Master Plan. The Board of Public Utilities was the lead agency, but could not have done this work without the assistance and the cooperation of virtually all of the departments within state government. It was released this past January, which right now feels like a lifetime ago, as most of our concentration has been on this pandemic. In it, we identify 7 core strategies for transitioning New Jersey to a clean energy economy. It's our roadmap. It's going to get us to our eventual destination. And it's so exciting to be part of that. It's so exciting for me personally, and I know it's extremely exciting for the staff who works at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and the staff that continues to move our agency, our department forward, even with the difficulties that we are facing. One of the key strategies is electrifying transportation. 40+% of the carbon emitted into our air in New Jersey comes from transportation. 40%. We have no choice but to electrify our transportation. From mass transit to the cars you and I drive. And we also have to electrify the building sectors. This is another area that has been neglected over the years, and one that has been identified as a key to achieving our goal of 100% clean energy. Commissioner McCabe mentioned the RGGI auction proceeds and how we are using those funds for clean and equitable transportation, especially in our low to moderate income communities. We have been working alongside DEP to reduce emissions and build out our electric vehicle infrastructure to encourage EV uptake. The BPU, through our Clean Energy Program, is offering up to a $5,000 incentive toward the purchase or lease of a new EV in New Jersey. So far, the program, and it just initiated, it just started, has approved over 1,900 applications. We are moving quickly with this, and people are jumping right on it. Our goal is to have 330,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025. And this incentive will help get us there. We are also working with New Jersey Transit regarding the bus transportation within the state of New Jersey. Electrification is necessary. And we do have a clean fleet incentive program that offers municipalities two $4,000 grants toward the purchase of new EVs and $1,500 toward the purchase of a level 2 charging station. We have to ensure the infrastructure is there so that people are not reluctant to buy an electric vehicle. So people are not concerned with range and range anxiety. Just like gas stations, charging stations have to be readily available and strategically placed in order for people to feel comfortable. Another way we're combating climate change is through energy efficiency, which reduces energy demand and eliminates wasted energy while lowering costs for customers. The Board of Public Utilities recently approved the state's next generation of energy efficiency and demand reduction programs, which will transition New Jersey to some of the highest energy savings in the United States. Already with our existing Comfort Partners program, we have helped income-eligible customers save energy and money and improve the safety and comfort of their homes by installing energy efficiency measures for free. For free. Let me say it a third time. For free. Go on to our website, njcleanenergy.com. See what we have to offer, and see what you can benefit from. If we're going to achieve our goal, we need the participation of every citizen in the state of New Jersey. Mitigating the effects of climate change is the responsibility of all of us. Not only for some of us, but all of us. Our environmental justice communities can also benefit from our community solar energy pilot program, which will soon be accepting applications for year 2. In year 1, we approved more than 75 megawatts of projects, all of which will serve low and moderate income communities. Everyone has to have the opportunity to participate in the clean energy revolution that we are currently in. That's enough renewable energy to power approximately 15,000 homes. These projects will improve access and equity by making renewables available to underserved communities through a virtual subscription to a remote solar installation located somewhere other than their own rooftop, hence community solar. Those who were previously unable to go solar due to cost or lack of roof control will be able to participate in the clean energy revolution. happening here in New Jersey. And again, I'm so excited about this because how many of us have an opportunity to participate in a revolution in the industry in which we are participating? We are transforming in the state of New Jersey through the vision and leadership of Governor Murphy, how we produce and how we use energy here in our great state. That's a revolution. New Jersey has already had very successful solar programs. We intend to build upon that success with community solar. We are in excess of 135,000 solar installations here in the state of New Jersey and are the #1 state of installed solar per square mile. New Jersey solar industry employs more than 6,500 people in green, good-paying jobs, and we expect that number to grow. Offshore wind has been a very exciting adventure thus far. We're currently in the midst of our first solicitation and moving forward with that eventual completion a few years down the road. We went out for our second solicitation just a couple of weeks ago, and that award will be given sometime in late spring of 2021. Last year, New Jersey set the record for the largest single project solicitation for offshore wind in the United States, and that was with our first solicitation, with a nation-leading 1,100 megawatts in the Ocean Wind project. It is expected to power just those 1,100 megawatts, roughly 500,000 homes, and generate $1.17 billion in economic benefits. $1.17 billion, in addition to creating an estimated 15,000 jobs over the 20-year project life. There is money in green. Money. The New Jersey wind port, to be built in Salem County, will provide another 1,500 jobs in support of clean energy and bring up to $500 million in new economic activity in South Jersey. We are seeing the birth of a new industry in the state of New Jersey. We are seeing New Jersey evolve as a national and international leader as far as offshore wind is concerned. We are seeing New Jersey establish its position as the supply chain for the entire East Coast for offshore wind. That means economic incentives here in the state of New Jersey. That means jobs here in the state of New Jersey. And that solidifies and will solidify New Jersey's position as a leader. By investing in our clean energy workforce now, we can get thousands of New Jerseyans back to work in support of a healthier, more resilient future for the Garden State. In addition to all of these initiatives, I alluded to before the fact that all segments of our population have to have the opportunity to participate in this green revolution. Therefore, I created the Office of Clean Energy Equity, responsible for overseeing the equitable deployment of clean energy technologies and energy efficiency programs to our low and moderate income communities, as well as serving as a liaison to those communities. We need everyone to have the opportunity to participate. And through this office, we are going to the best of our ability, ensure the fact that no one, if they want to participate, is left behind. And I encourage everyone to participate. I encourage everyone to participate because I believe you and I have a moral obligation to mitigate the effects of climate change. Moral obligation, not to ourselves, but a moral obligation to future generations. As I mentioned before, to our children, to our grandchildren, and to subsequent generations. We cannot hand over the reins of leadership to future generations without us doing what is humanly necessary and within our human control to mitigate climate change. So please, go out there. I always feel like I'm in a religious situation here or something. Preach the word. And for those who don't believe that climate change is real, show them a picture of California. Show them a picture of floods that have occurred that would not have occurred 50 years ago. This is our challenge, and we must meet that challenge. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your interest, and I ask that you take care of yourself and you take care of one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and for the insightful remarks and for the amazing and comprehensive role that the board plays in transportation, electrification, energy efficiency, community solar, and all the points that you covered today. At this time, I would like to ask Commissioner McCabe to rejoin us on video and audio. And I also understand that we've been joined by our legislative leadership in the form of Senator Bob Smith, who chairs our Environment and Energy Committee in the Senate, and Assemblywoman Nancy Pitkin, who chairs our Environment and Solid Waste Committee. So I'm not at all surprised, given the leadership that they've shown through the years. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. At this time, I'd like to invite Gene Herb to also join us in audio and video. Gene's been monitoring a very active chat box, as you might imagine, and we have lots of questions. And in the interest of time, we will try to do a few. And Gene, please take it away.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, really great questions. So thanks everybody for that. So I'm just picking out a couple that seem to be themes throughout the chat box. So the first question, which came from a couple folks, is what are the prospects that New Jersey will join the Transportation and Climate Initiative as a key strategy to decarbonize the transportation sector and raise dollars that can be invested in a green transportation infrastructure? And related to that question is, what strategies, if New Jersey's actively participating in TCI when it becomes the law of the land, what actions will take place to make sure that equity is a key element of TCI spending?
Okay, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is in a nutshell, it's Reggie for the transportation sector. It's the same idea of putting a cap on the amount of, well, I'm not sure you can really cap the amount of fuel, but it would require fuel suppliers to buy allowances for the amount of fuel that they sell into the state, and then we could take that money and invest it into strategies that would help us with our decarbonization goals for the transportation sector. New Jersey has been participating since the beginning of the Murphy administration in discussions about how you would design such a program. The transportation sector is quite different than the electric sector, so this is a very complicated endeavor. And we are still looking at it with great interest for its possibilities. It is something that we plan to stay at the table on with the discussions and consider whether down the road we might be able to, this might be in the interest of New Jersey. So we're very much at the table at this point, but it's still in the design stage.
Thank you. Catherine, it's right on point, as always. I think the second part of your question is extremely important. I think that's why all of us are concerned with the equity aspect and the environmental justice aspect. This is so vitally important. And I'm going to repeat myself if you don't mind. I'm old, I do that. I'm going to repeat myself by saying every segment of our community, every segment of our state has to have at least the opportunity to participate in clean energy. And we have to ensure that as we whether it's a specific notice like we have to you, or some other vehicle has to be done. And with your indulgence, Gary, you had mentioned that Senator Smith and Senator Pinkett are on the line. And I just want to thank for their outstanding leadership as far as clean energy is concerned here in New Jersey. It takes not only the leadership of the governor, but leadership of the legislature to ensure the fact that we as a state, these individuals make the so it's just public.
Thanks to both of you. So here, let me raise another question that's come up in the chat. I'll try to go back and forth a little bit between climate mitigation and climate resilience. Will there be an effort to redirect dollars and funding streams to assist with investments in coastal adaptation, such as redirecting state shore protection dollars to go beyond beach replenishment projects?
Of course, we cannot limit our adaptation efforts or funding to just the coastal or the beach replenishment projects. If you look at the last coastal resilience plan, it was all beach replenishment projects. That's back in the 1980s, but we have to look far beyond that now. There's many other things that we can do.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to assume you'll tell me when to stop.
Yeah, why don't we do one more, Jane, in the
Okay.
interest of time. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll combine these two. So there is a question about whether RGGI dollars are currently being spent, if they're being spent yet, and if not, when will they be spent? And a question related to that about will some of the dollars go to creating walkable and bikeable communities? And then a little bit related, I guess, is a question that points out that the consensus targets that were established in the State Global Warming Response Act were achieved at a time before the most recent science and the targets set in the Paris Agreement. And so the question is about whether we'll be looking to update our policies such as RGGI and others to represent the most recent science.
Since the DEP is the lead agency in RGGI, I'm going to pass the baton to
Yes, yes. I mean, for RGGI funds, we've just had a third auction, and I'm not frankly quite sure whether the funds have actually been spent yet. But the projects solicitations have gone out, and people have put in lots of very interesting proposals, really worthy proposals, more than we can probably fund. So we've got lots and lots to choose from here. Whether or not they can include the biking and walkable communities at this point, I would have to, that's certainly within the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish, but whether the strategic funding plan, the letter of the strategic funding plan allows for that at this point versus focusing just on the electrification of transportation, I'm not certain. I would have to go back to look at the precise language of the plan. I would refer you to that. And what was that last question that you?
Oh, just whether the question is recognizing that the targets that were set in the state's global warming response act were set through consensus and the legislative process at the time, and the science has emerged considerably from them. Are there any efforts or intentions of revisiting those targets to reflect the most recent science?
Well, I think the 80% reduction from a 2006 baseline by 2050 is a pretty darn aggressive target. And Governor Murphy has already, from the outset of his administration, gone one better with 100% clean energy by 2050. So I think we've already done that. And take a look at the Global Warming Response Act report when it comes out to show exactly what you have to do to get how far down that line to 100%.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate Commissioner McCabe and President Fiordaliso's time today. It was great having you. We very much appreciate your insights. And at this time, we're going to move on to our next panel. So please stay safe and thank you. And we'll see you again soon. And for those, if we didn't get to your questions, sorry about that. I'm sure you understand in the interest of time. We will be sharing all the questions with all of our panelists. So they certainly will be seen by both the commissioner and the president. So at this time, I would like to move on again to our second panel, which is a policy response panel. And I'd like to remind everybody to please continue to bring questions to our chat box. And I'm going to ask all of our participants from our panel to turn on your videos and cameras and say hello as I introduce you. We are going to be employing the Hollywood Squares or Brady Bunch kind of format. So we'll see all the panelists at one time. And I'm going to go in alpha order. And I want to please welcome Dr. Anna Baptista, the Milano School of Policy Management and Environment, the New School University. Anna? You're on. Now you're on. All right. Very good.
Hi, Gary. Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Well, Anna, we're going to go through and introduce everybody and then come back to you, just to make sure everything is working. Okay, so the Dr. George DiFerdinando of the local boards of health association. George?
I should be here somewhere, although I don't see my picture. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, George, and we can see you now, too.
There we go.
Now we can see.
But we can't hear Gary. Gary has gone mute.
Gary, you're getting a little feedback on your microphone, so I've been quietly muting you at times. Just check your muting before you talk. Sorry.
No problem at all. Tom Gilbert. Tom?
Yes, hi. Pleasure to be with
the Conservation Foundation. Very good. All right, Rob Graff at Delaware Valley Regional Planning Authority.
Good Regional Planning Commission, but thank you. I'm here. Yes.
Oh, sorry. And Brandon McCoy, New Jersey Policy Perspective. I see Brandon.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Good to see you.
And I see Dr. Nikki Sheets. Hello, sir. How are you? From the N.S. Watson Institute of Public Policy at Thomas Edison State College and the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance.
Good afternoon.
All right. So first, again, thank you to all the panelists for joining us today and for the many historic contributions that you've given to the Climate Change Alliance. Really appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to have you here today and to have an opportunity to work with you. You're all very familiar with the climate change issues and public policies in New Jersey and represent very different constituencies, which I think will be great for making for a very healthy and robust discussion today. And I'm going to ask each of you to give no more than 5 minute kind of lightning reactions to the overview presentations that were given by the commissioner and the president. And again, we're going to go back into alpha order. So Anna, let me ask you to turn on your mic and we'll get going. Thank you very much.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Good to see all of you. I think I'm going to start out by my first reaction is commending the tremendous body of work and amount of work that DEP and BPU are doing collectively on these important issues in the state. It's really overwhelming to see that timeline. And to be honest with you, to hear so much of the referencing to environmental justice and in so much of what they were talking about, 10 years ago, I don't think this would have been the case, that you would have heard so much consideration of environmental justice communities in the conversation around climate change and energy. But nevertheless, we still, I think, have to push ourselves to be bolder and much more ambitious when we talk not just about our climate and energy goals, but about how we make those real for environmental justice communities. Because I think although we all have good intentions to work vigorously on achieving our goals, environmental justice still seems to be sort of an addendum to many of our climate policies and energy policies that are coming out. And I say this because, one, I'll be really frank here that, I think everybody on the New Jersey Climate Adaptation Group knows well that the environmental justice community here in New Jersey and generally across the country have taken a very clear stand in opposing market mechanisms as the main mechanism for which to drive climate and energy policies. Things like RGGI and TCI are not favored by the environmental justice community precisely because they do not center equitable outcomes. And it's not because we don't believe that they can achieve some level of climate mitigation. Certainly they can, but that their primary goal is not to achieve equitable climate and energy outcomes, and they can't guarantee those outcomes in a market mechanism schemes. So, we would love to see in much of the proposals a much greater emphasis and centering of equity and EJ goals as the center of these policies. Let's be clear that the legacy of the current climate and energy crisis we're in lives squarely in environmental justice communities. Cities like Newark hold the transportation and fossil fuel infrastructure that we're all trying to phase out. And so we need to really think carefully about how it is we're going to make tangible the targeted reduction and mitigation of emissions that are harming people today. CO2 emissions are very critical to reduce, but while we're reducing CO2, we also have to be mindful of the criteria pollutants like particulate matter, NOx, and many others that are harming people's health today, and that can be driven down at the same time that we drive down CO2 emissions. And to do that, we have to be able to say specifically how we're going to meet targeted emissions reductions, not just investments in environmental justice communities that come from market mechanisms like RGGI and TCI. And there are really concrete ways that we can start to think about this in terms of, for example, not just electrifying passenger vehicles, but setting really aggressive targets for reducing emissions from heavy-duty diesel engines, and the port sector and goods movement sectors. And in terms of the energy, there are really many exciting energy and renewable energy and energy efficiency investments on the horizon. And again, I think one of the most important things is to remember is that low and moderate income communities, EJ communities, have historically received the lowest percentage share of the benefits from many of the existing programs. And so to improve that, we need to have really explicit targets for how funds will be allocated and tracked and managed in EJ communities, and how people will access jobs associated with the renewable energy and energy efficiency economy. And we can look at examples in Illinois. The Illinois Future Energy Jobs Act provides some really interesting examples on how we can be very explicit about the jobs and renewable energy and energy efficiency targets that we set for our state. And I'll just say one last thing, which is that we need to clean up our renewable energy, what we consider renewable energy. There is no place for garbage incineration or fossil fuel projects in our renewable portfolio standards of the future. And so we need those industries, dirty industries, need to be removed from our future energy proposals. I'll stop there.
All right, Anna, thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to turn to George DiFerdinando from the Boards of Health Association. George.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to thank again our earlier presenters. As you might imagine, as we talk about environmental justice and mitigating climate change, the boards of health in New Jersey, as well as the departments of health, as you'll hear from David Henry in the 3 o'clock hour, they are fully engaged in dealing with what is at least arguably a climate change related event, that is the spread of a novel pathogen around the planet, in this case SARS-CoV-2. I think most people in infectious disease would feel that it is concluded science that the new pathogens that we've seen in the 21st century are related not just to climate change, but to the underlying drivers of climate change: population growth, urbanization, worldwide travel, and deforestation. So the public health community is in the process of attempting to mitigate in real time these effects. And this brings out both the strong points and the weak points of the public health system nationally, as well as in New Jersey. I'll stick to New Jersey. And for those who don't know, the vast majority of funding for public health in New Jersey is locally based. Think school districts. And both the positives and negatives of the New Jersey school district system, as we know it, mean that in Mercer County, for instance, where I am, Princeton has a per capita expenditure for public health. And if you were to compare that to Hamilton or compare that to Trenton, I'm pretty sure you'd see that the public health expenditure per capita is very different in those three communities. Same thing is true for my hometown of Paterson, New Jersey, versus some of the other communities in Passaic County. So if we're going to have public health equity, which is, I think, very much related to environmental justice, given that the environmental changes are going to drive public health dangers in the 21st century, we're going to have to speak to the issue of equitable funding for public health in New Jersey. And I'll leave it at that. I'm glad to talk about that. But that particular issue is challenging to all of us to figure out a modification. I think we're in a position where the public health community in New Jersey, if you think about it, really couldn't be more visible than it currently is. We're seeing, and people are aware of their public health departments and their boards of health more than they've been in a generation, if not longer than that. And yet at the same time, in the past 20 years, both nationally and New Jersey, there's been a marked attrition in public health workers. Some of that is being mitigated in real time with one-time or time-limited expenditures for people like contact tracers. But it also means that in New Jersey, and there must be some wood nearby that everybody can knock on, we're in a situation where we haven't had some of the heat events or weather events in New Jersey this summer that typically public health would need to respond to. Public health is pretty much maxed out in dealing with the current crisis, and if we were to get more than this current crisis, we'd wind up pulling in people from hither and yon to attempt to deal with that, and it probably wouldn't happen. There probably would be damage to people. So I think the climate community needs to realize that, and I'm sure most of the people here do, that the effector arm of mitigation, not the effector arm of of rectifying climate change, but mitigating the individual and to a great extent the community-wide impacts of climate change is currently maxed out in New Jersey, is likely to feel the brunt of any funding cuts in the coming years. And so it is a partner in this, and as such, I'm just going to assume that the people interested in climate change here are going to be interested in supporting the public health community in New Jersey, and be glad to take questions as they come up during the discussion session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. All right, let's turn to Tom Gilbert from the Conservation Foundation. Tom, you're on.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be a part of this panel and to have the opportunity to respond to the remarks made by Commissioner McCabe and President Fiordaliso. And I too would like to commend them and Governor Murphy for demonstrating real leadership to address the climate crisis, both the causes and the impacts. And it's remarkable how just in the span of a couple of years, New Jersey has moved from a laggard to a national leader on these issues. And such leadership from the states is absolutely critical right now, given that Washington is not addressing the issue. And, you know, the urgency could not be any greater. It's just really unbelievable how we seem to be reminded daily of the urgency with just, you know, new crises. You know, the Western U.S. in flames right now. Another hurricane bearing down on the Gulf Coast. I mean, the alarm bells could not be sounding, I think, any louder than they are. And it's critical to New Jersey in particular. As we heard from Commissioner McCabe, we know that New Jersey is experiencing even greater warming than other states. We know that New Jersey is on the front lines in terms of sea level rise, with more than 4.5 billion in coastal real estate, and of course lives and safety at risk. And it's critical because environmental justice demands it. And just like COVID-19, we know that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color, and the pollution from the fossil fuels that are causing climate change has made these communities even more susceptible to major health impacts from the virus. But New Jersey's leadership on the climate crisis is essential not just to address all of these threats, but also because it has the potential to bring so many benefits to the state. For example, New Jersey's cutting-edge energy master plan that is based on very sophisticated modeling is not only putting us on the pathway to 100% clean energy, but it also is putting us on the least cost pathway, as the cost of renewables continues to fall and consumers will spend less on fossil fuels to heat their homes or fuel their vehicles. And as we heard from President Fiordaliso, it will create thousands of good local jobs that pay higher wages than average wages, building clean energy projects that'll make our communities safer and healthier rather than increase pollution in our communities. And we know from studies that, for example, wind and solar projects create twice as many jobs as the same investment in fossil fuel projects. And I think the figures that President Fiordaliso cited, 1,500 jobs associated with the offshore wind port in Salem County are a good example of that. So that's why we've joined with other environmental and business and civic groups in calling for a sustainable green recovery to COVID-19 that prioritizes funding for clean energy, for clean water infrastructure, for parks and trails, and for climate resiliency, so that we can create much needed jobs and put people back to work while making our communities healthier and safer in the process. Another example of this, we know that investments in climate resiliency will not only protect our communities, but avoid much greater costs down the road. For every dollar invested in disaster reduction actions, we know that an average of $7 is saved from reduced flood risk. We are pleased that what we've seen so far of the statewide climate resiliency and the coastal resiliency plans, that we're seeing an emphasis on nature-based solutions. And these approaches will yield real bang for the buck and important co-benefits, including carbon sequestration and wildlife benefits. And I'm sure many of you saw the recent study from Rutgers and Rowan that just came out, among other things, noted that 20% of the state's salt marshes are vulnerable to drowning under rising seas by mid-century. And it recommended preserving areas to allow those coastal marshes to retreat. And I think those are the kinds of natural solutions that we should be seeking out in our resiliency efforts. Finally, I just wanted to note that as we move forward in making New Jersey a leader on clean energy, we should pay careful attention to foster sound siting of renewables. As the most densely populated state in the nation, New Jersey can't afford to clear our forests and the carbon that they sequester, or cover our best farmland and soils that we need to keep the garden in the garden state with solar panels. And we must also carefully site offshore wind projects to protect wildlife and fisheries. But I am confident that with proper care, we can meet our clean energy goals while also protecting our open spaces and our natural resources that are so essential to our quality of life, our health, and our economy. And I'll close with that, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom. All right, let's turn to Rob Graff from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Rob. Unmute yourself, Rob.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I want to thank Marjorie Kaplan and Jean Herb for putting together this virtual New Jersey Climate Change Alliance workshop, and also thanks to Commissioner McCabe and President Fiordaliso for their time in helping with this and presenting on it. The leadership of New Jersey today is impressive in this area, and I just want to note that it was very impressive about a decade ago under Governor Corzine. So this is not a new role for New Jersey. You're sort of getting back into it. The Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission is the metropolitan planning organization for the 9 counties of Greater Philadelphia, 4 of which are in New Jersey. We also work with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, which covers North Jersey, centered in Newark, and the South Jersey Transportation Planning Organization that's in Vineland and covers South Jersey. Together, they're the 3 MPOs that work with that cover the state of New Jersey. We've been really impressed and pleased to work with both the DEP and the BPU on climate change issues. We've been consulting with them. They've been looking to us to bring some of what we know from the local level up, particularly in transportation issues. Rather than using the words mitigation or adaptation, I prefer to use reducing greenhouse gas emissions and responding to current climate change and preparing for future climate change. I'm particularly interested in, DVRPC is particularly interested in long-term, very long-term issues such as strategic relocation to safety from areas like the New Jersey coast, which we can't protect forever. Echoing Anna Baptista, we are not going to price our way out of this mess. Changing pricings may be necessary, but it's certainly not sufficient to get where we need to get. I think the opportunity from this workshop is one that's important, which is the importance of making new connections which hadn't been necessary in the past, connecting the transportation world with the utility world, creating the planning world with the utility world, and also the importance of keeping up with the current information in a fast-changing world. So at DVRPC, we're working with New Jersey Transit on battery electric buses by including them in a national information sharing conversation with 10 of the largest bus agencies that are implementing battery electric buses throughout the U.S., including SEPTA, here based in Philadelphia. Another thing we work on is to ensure that the best research on electric vehicles is brought to policymakers. We advise both DEP and BPU on bringing them some of these issues. I've just put into the chat box the website at DVRPC, which has a lot of resources that you may be interested in. A couple I'll highlight is we do a regional greenhouse gas inventory to the municipal level to help with the planning. There's a publication on municipal management and the changing climate to help municipalities at the local level adapt to some of the climate issues they're dealing with. And also something that I know DEP has used, we have a web map on planning for electric vehicles, which maps vehicle distribution when you get to 330,000 vehicles in New Jersey, where they're most likely to be, and where would those people be most likely to work. So you can help plan the charging station deployment with an analytical basis. New Jersey's electricity supply has gotten much cleaner over the past decade, significantly cleaner, primarily due to cheap natural gas replacing coal. And one of the challenges for many renewable sources is that they're intermittent by nature. Solar isn't produced at night, and production is reduced on cloudy days. Wind power is not produced when it's still. And some of this intermittency can be mitigated by battery storage and demand reduction, but storage doesn't last all that long, maybe a couple hours. And there's a lot of research in storage that may result in more affordable long-term storage. But storage can only be used by those it can be used by either people supplying electricity or using electricity, but there's a real need for dispatchable power that can be turned on and off. And right now, about 40% of the electricity in New Jersey is provided by nuclear power, which certainly presents both national security and radioactive waste challenges. However, it does not produce greenhouse gas emissions, and I think an important challenge to decreasing greenhouse gas emissions in such a way associated with electricity generation for our region and for the state of New Jersey is assuring that should the amount of nuclear power decrease, it should be replaced with other greenhouse gas-free generation rather than with natural gas. I think it's important that we also, in electrification of transportation, we look at trucks, heavy-duty trucks, heavy-duty, medium-duty trucks. The National Association, the North American Coalition for Freight Efficiency, released a report about 3 weeks ago on high potential regions for electric truck deployment, one of which, of course, is New Jersey. And there was also recently over the summer a multi-state medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles memorandum of understanding signed by New Jersey, and that's an exciting area that also the state is working with. And we at DVRPC are planning to work with on mapping truck routes and seeing how truck electrification can affect air quality in EJ communities. However, it's important to remember that electric vehicles are not the be-all and end-all. They still enable sprawl. They still take up a lot of land when they're parked. They still can hit people that are biking or walking or each other. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think that we're well on the way in New Jersey's leadership in this area will help us do the best we can. So that's all I have for now. Thanks so much.
Great, Rob. Thank you very much. And let's turn to Brandon, to the New Jersey policy perspective. Brandon, please, you're on.
Thank you so much, Gary. Great to see everyone. I echo everybody's comments, and thanks to Commissioner McCabe and President Fiordaliso for all of their hard work in moving New Jersey forward in a variety of critical ways to ensure that we're better addressing and preparing for the effects of climate change. And I also extend that thanks to my fellow panelists, because we all know there's a ton of work to be done, and we can't have too many people doing that work, especially considering some of the tight timelines that we are on. At a time where both public health and racial equity are gaining more attention than ever before, especially when it comes to crafting public policy and government response to the many challenges that we all face, centering the needs of marginalized communities, especially as we grapple with climate change, is absolutely critical to success. And to that end, when those who work with and represent environmental justice communities speak up and raise concerns with certain ideas that have been promoted for so long, Anna previously mentioned concerns with market-based funding mechanisms, those concerns need to actually be taken seriously and addressed head on to ensure that we're not pursuing changes and implementing policies that will have negative or unintended consequences on the families that we are purporting to care about. So I just want to lift that up. Now, anyone who knows me or knows New Jersey policy perspective knows that what we care about most, in addition to racial equity and economic justice, is tax fairness to support robust and responsible budgets. We view the budget as a moral document that should be securing the resources that every New Jersey needs to be successful. And so anyone who's paid attention to New Jersey over the past 30 years or so knows that we've not done a great job of that as a state. Under the Murphy administration, we've gotten much better. And there are a lot of decisions that were made in the past few years that have put us in a better position to fund our priorities and obligations than we previously were. But we still have quite a ways to go to secure a more resilient budget that funds all the things we know our communities need. And that easily includes efforts to support green energy investments, expand public transportation and make it more reliable, encourage purchase of electric vehicles, and support the development of the infrastructure to enable that, and the many ways that we need to be mitigating damage from climate events. And none of this will be possible in the slightest if we continue to have a backwards conversation on budgeting in New Jersey. We tend to start with the question of how much do we have, and then figure out what we'd like to appropriate that amount to. What we should be doing is asking, what will it cost to realize the state that we want to see? What will it require to have the state that we want to live in? And then discuss the best way to raise the revenues to make that possible. Only then can we have a real, honest, and open discussion that will better lead us towards not only the policies that will help us meet our challenges, but ensure that we have the resources to fund them, most importantly, sustainably and reliably, not up and down, up and down. And I think just looking to some of the cuts in state government with regards to departments, including the Department of Environmental Protection, you can't expect our departments to respond to the moment when we cut their staff and we cut their funding, and then we say, look, it doesn't work. Yeah, you cut out their legs from under them. So fund them, make sure they have the resources that they need to be successful, and then we can move towards a better day. Lastly, I will say that one thing I'd like to see a bit more of is proactive research and activity in anticipation of climate refugees, both outside the state and within. By that, I mean, we know that there will be a certain level of sea level rise for sure. And we know that will cause families in those areas to leave, at least those who are able to, and we should be determining how to help those who are unable to on their own accord. There's a growing body of research on the migration patterns of those who are harmed by climate change and sea level rise in particular, that's looking to understand where they migrate to and why. And we should be doing that here in New Jersey. When people leave the shore, are they more likely to go to our cities, our suburbs, or our rural areas? How far are they likely to go? And most importantly, what resources are these places going to need to absorb this increase in population? Getting started on that and being able to understand where migration might occur will help us to proactively distribute resources in anticipation of what we know is to come, as opposed to being reactive, which often winds up in families falling through the cracks. And so both I and New Jersey Policy Perspective are eager to take part in that conversation and to help produce that research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon. And our final panelist is Dr. Nikki Sheets from the Thomas Watson Policy Institute. Nikki, please, sir, you're up.
Thanks, Gary. Well, I hate to start on the down and be a downer, but some of the facts in New Jersey are, unfortunately, is that the more people of color live in a neighborhood, the higher the estimate of pollution. And the more poor people live in a neighborhood, the higher the estimate of pollution. And we have to, that's not acceptable to anybody. And we have to break that relationship between race, poverty, and pollution. And we got to start with the cumulative impacts bill that was passed recently. But that's only a start, and it's not enough. We have to combine that with other policies to address what is an unacceptable relationship in our state. And we got to use climate change mitigation policy to help address the disproportionate amount of pollution in environmental justice neighborhoods. I'm going to echo what Dr. Baptista said. For many, many years, the EJ community here and nationally has opposed carbon trading because it doesn't guarantee emissions reductions in EJ communities. And we need policies that not only fight climate change, but also guarantee the reductions of that disproportionate amount of pollution in communities of color and poor communities. Now, New Jersey EJ community opposed going into RGGI, and we lost that fight. But we came back with a proposal that said, well, if you're going to go into RGGI, at least make it a little bit more EJ palatable by forcing power plants located in EJ communities or that significantly affect EJ communities, forcing them to reduce their emissions, not giving them a choice of buying allowances and to keep polluting, but force them to reduce their emissions. So far, we haven't heard an answer to that. Let's talk about TCI for a minute. Now we come to a critically important climate change mitigation policy around mobile sources. And we've got to address mobile sources, greenhouse gases, but also the co-pollutants to go with them. At the heart of TCI, as Dr. Baptista said, is a carbon trading system that, again, will not guarantee emissions reductions. So again, the EJ community is speaking out against that. Now, we have a chance not to go into it, right? And we are hoping the state will listen to us this time. I'm sorry, that's my phone ringing in the background. Instead of adopting a policy that's going to divide us, that's going to divide the progressive community in the state, let's come up with a policy that doesn't have carbon trading at its center, and a policy that all of us can support. You know, we've said for years that taking the funding, a promise of funding in the future, is not good enough to take care of present emissions that are harming and killing people. Let me touch on energy policy. I think BPU is going in the right direction, but we know there are current problems with energy efficiency programs that serve low-income communities. There are access problems. There are problems that the cost of rehabbing housing and doing energy efficiency is higher in low-income communities, and often vital services don't go far enough. So we have to address those problems, and we have to make sure that the energy efficiency policies and those that run them right now is the state and PSEG are closer to the communities that are being served. So we call for community-oriented organizations to be able to run energy efficiency programs, and for the creation of what we're calling urban energy community development corporations that are close to communities and can run energy programs for communities. Community solar we support, but it needs to be coupled with community energy planning that goes into communities and listens to communities and accesses energy needs in those communities, and helps to make sure that programs energy efficiency programs are accessible to people of color, low-income people, and actually provides a path to ownership and entrepreneurship. The last thing I'll say is that the environmental justice community is working hard to come up with policies, and actually come up with policies that will bring folks together. And in this, I'm going to echo Brandon now, in this era where there is new emphasis on racial justice, we hope that some of the things the environmental justice community is saying will be heard, will be taken seriously, and that folks will work with us to implement policies that address the issues directly and are not divisive. Thanks, Gary.
Great. Thank you very much, Nikki, for your insights. So at this time, and then certainly want to thank all the panelists for sharing their insights. If everyone can come turn their screens back on, we have about 10 minutes or so to go through at least one general policy question that I'd like to throw out for any area of public policy, how we make progress as we identify the barriers to change, and we directions that we can take to overcome challenges. And both Nikki and Anna, in particular, for the environmental justice issue, touched upon some of the barriers and challenges that we have. So I'd like to sort of entertain that for the constituencies that you work with. What are, from a climate perspective, the barriers and challenges that we face? So let me first jump to George. We talked a lot about equity issues, and you mentioned public health equity. George, can you share some of your thoughts on barriers and challenges? George?
Working on it. There we go. Well, I mentioned, and I know it's a big lift, but the idea, for instance, I know a gentleman who works in finance. I won't say his name, but I watched him grow up. And he currently works for the local for the state administration. And when I brought up the issue of the lack of equity in public health financing from the state, he assured me that public health is financed from the state. It goes to the community's general fund. And I pointed out to him that this type of non-dedicated fund public health, they actually don't go to public health programs. And so as long as that's the funding source, you're going to find local municipalities having to choose between the health of their community and other demands that frankly won't necessarily have a health impact. And as long as that type of funding occurs in Jersey, we're going to have a situation where there are quote unquote rich public health communities and then other communities that essentially cannot afford to spend as much money on a public health covered life as the community sitting right next to them. That is such a basic inequity that I'm not sure where else to go. People need to realize that different communities in New Jersey spend different amounts of money to keep their residents alive. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, George. Andy, let me turn to you. You used such a fundamental phrase of making actions real. Can you elaborate on some of the EJ challenges that we face and obstacles we need to overcome?
Sorry, you were referring that to me, right? I didn't hear.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was referring it to you. You had mentioned in your remarks, making actions real. You know, it's as fundamental as that. It's as basic as that. And Nikki had mentioned the EJ bill, you know, and moving forward. You know, what are our immediate challenges that we need to address and overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the immediate challenges is how to make how to make some of these commitments around EJ actually tangible, whether it's in terms of actual emissions reductions targets. For example, how do you get electric generating stations or specific parts of the transportation sector that have the most health harming potential? How do we target those for emissions reductions first in climate mitigation policies that we're putting forth? And even in terms of the benefits, a lot of people focus on investments in EJ communities as the way we're going to get to equity. But there's very little meat on the bone exactly on the details and the mechanisms for how you get those investments into those communities in a way that's actually going to make a real impact. So, for example, who's controlling dollars that come from RGGI that are intended to create jobs? How do you set up appropriate job training programs that give people access not only to the appropriate training, but access to the pipeline of jobs that might be coming down in the energy sector? You know, who are the best positioned groups to carry out energy efficiency retrofits in communities? You know, what's the scale of funding you're actually going to need to put a dent in the need in terms of energy efficiency, and even in terms of for example, transportation sector? You know, where are the biggest bang for the bucks in terms of reducing emissions and the investments? You know, when we think about electrifying the public transit sector or the heavy and medium diesel sector, what are the investments you're going to need and the infrastructure you're going to need for that versus, you know, the passenger vehicle sector? I would suggest that by making a targeted investment in the infrastructure to turn over the diesel fleets and some of the area sources in the port, you'll get a much bigger return in terms of emissions reductions that actually have health harming potential and climate mitigation potential. So those are the kinds of analysis we need and the kinds of targeted, intentional carve outs for equity to actually become real. And I'm sure Nikki has other ideas for how to make it. What are the challenges in doing that?
Yeah, and let's turn to Nikki. Nikki, right out the chute, you mentioned some of the challenges in your initial remarks. Please elaborate, and in particular, building off of Anna's remarks.
Yeah, let me repeat one of the things I said. I mean, what drives us a little crazy, and what Dr. Baptista is referring to, is we'll put a climate change mitigation policy into effect, and then we'll say, well, we'll use the funding later down the road to address EJ concerns, and we want the emissions reductions up front. So, okay, we have RGGI, EJ community's not happy about it, but how can we use RGGI now to address disproportionate pollution in EJ communities? Right? What can we change about RGGI that will deliver those emissions reductions up front? Now, that doesn't mean we can't use the money later in the future to address EJ concerns, but we need to save lives now, as opposed to a promise of using the funding where we don't have a timetable, we don't know how much reductions the programs that are going to be funded, allegedly. Well, we believe at some point they'll be funded, but what will be the reductions? What communities will be involved? We need the reductions now to reduce illness and save lives in EJ communities now. And we know we can do that now with some changes to the current program.
Great. Let's turn to the natural resource time. Let me call on Tom. Tom, barriers and challenges, in particular with the climate mitigation on the natural resource side. Let's please share some of your thoughts.
Well, I guess the thought that I'd like to share, Gary, I think it responds to your question, but it goes beyond your question as well. I think one of the greatest challenges we have is that we simply have to move much quicker than we are. We have a tremendously long way to go in a short time to get there. And, a lot of our policies are geared on a 2050 timeframe. And I think it's critical. One thing we need to do is we need to interject that interim target, 2030 target. For example, the UN IPCC science suggests we need to reduce emissions 45% by 2030. I mean, that's daunting, right? And I'm hopeful that the Global Warming Response Act report that comes out will speak to where do we need to be by 2030 on the pathway to 2050, because we really have to have made a lot of progress in the next 10 years. And I'd also just like to agree with Dr. Baptista and Dr. Sheets. I think there is a real opportunity to, especially as DEP develops their greenhouse gas regulations right now, to use that as an opportunity to not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but achieve specific emissions reductions in EJ communities. That's a real opportunity on the table right now that we should absolutely capitalize on both fronts.
Yeah, and boy, your thought is so well taken in terms of timing and sense of urgency. And Rob, you had mentioned as part of your remarks, start, stop. New Jersey was in a leadership position over a decade ago in climate, and then took a timeout, if you will, and now we're sort of back with a very aggressive agenda under Governor Murphy. Maybe you can elaborate on some of Tom's remarks and your thoughts on challenges and barriers.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing I completely agree with Anna that there's been an emphasis on electrification of personal vehicles, and it's very disappointing to see that when there's so much more progress can be made per dollar on cleaning diesel, particularly since those vehicles that deliver freight are very highly influenced by price, and they will make changes quickly if you give them the right incentives. I think the real challenge with EJ communities and the reason they don't have strong voices, they don't have power. There's a lot of the tables where these decisions are being made where nobody from an EJ community or a legitimate representative of those communities is present. So that's sort of just a comment on what has been said so far. I think changing gears entirely is, one big challenge for this as a whole is that, making we need to make a carbon-free world as convenient and as affordable as the current fossil fuel-based world. People are not going to just change because, a certain number of people, and maybe everybody on this call, will make some changes due to the concern about the environment 50, 100 years from now and their children. But by and large, you make day-to-day changes on what's cheap and what's convenient. I'm going to go here because it's the place where I know I can get what I want cheaply and conveniently. And we need to keep sort of consumer economics and human behavior really strongly into account in rather than in making policies. We have to make it easier for people to choose an electric vehicle than a non-electric vehicle. We need to make it easier for freight companies to choose electric trucks. We need to make it easier for people to choose public transit. We need to make it easier for people to choose to live near their work so that their commutes aren't as far. And you can preach as much as you want, but if without making the economic signals in the way our current political economy is, we're not going to have those changes.
All right, Brandon, just wanted you to share opportunity to share some of mention where people are going to be going. Are they be going back to the cities, suburban areas? Now we have COVID overlaying on top of it. So many policy challenges for us to think through. Please share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, when I graduated Blaustein at Rutgers, we did a fundraiser and we sold shirts, and what the shirt said was, "Home rule is the only rule." And that is the everlasting challenge in the state, is that when we want to address regional issues or even statewide issues, there are political barriers to getting things done. Because of home rule, because of county powers and things like that. And I think that's something that we just need to keep in mind is, there's going to be a lot of communities that, that just the hundreds of tiny communities along the shore that, really, if you're thinking about it, in a rational perspective abroad, should be combining and should be getting larger. Just all the people that are going to be leaving low-lying areas. And I said shore before, but, low-lying areas, you look at those flood maps, Jersey City, Newark, Camden, Atlantic City, right? Our major, even New Brunswick. I was at Rutgers during Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. A lot of damage. I live in Trenton now because the flood maps here look great. So just thinking, even it's not just the shore, it's also our major cities are not really set up for, a great experience over the next couple of decades here when it comes to flooding. And so, there's a lot of research looking at sort of, Southeast Asia and some of the Indian continent and, some areas of Africa that are experiencing lots of flooding. Some parts of South America that are experiencing flooding. Looking at where are people going? Just what are the lines of movement? And it's still sort of fresh. It's still sort of in early days in this sort of research, but I think we really need to be on top of it and understanding how it is sort of evolving and what are the different things that people are learning as they're looking at that stuff. And as much as we can, I would love to do a project here in New Jersey of just saying, okay, if we know that there's going to be 6 feet of sea level rise, whatever it is along the shore, where can we anticipate people in La Valette are going to go? Where can we anticipate people in Atlantic City are going to go? Et cetera, and start having honest conversations. Because I think for too many people still, even though we all know that this is a real thing that we are facing now, and we see the effects now, for too many people still, climate change is a challenge for the future. And we got to make it clear that it's a challenge right now, and we got to be thinking proactively about it, not just reactively.
Right. Thank you, Brandon. And at this point, Gene, I know we've gotten questions in the chat box, and maybe we can take some time to. Gene, can you rejoin us, please?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. We do have a lot of questions in the chat box, and one thing that occurs to me, looking at some of them, there are a number that for Commissioner McCabe and President Fiordaliso. So I think what we can probably do is to follow up with their team and see if we can try to get some answers to those and post them on our website. So what I want to do is blend a couple of the questions that we're seeing here and maybe ask the participants if they could talk a little bit about what they think in the short term, maybe over the next year or so, are the biggest opportunities to synergistically advance the connections between addressing climate impacts through resilience and adaptation and reducing the causes of climate change, the emissions, the pollution that causes climate change. So, what specifically are the opportunities to be able to advance strategies that give us gains in both realms? And I think that's for any panelist.
Well, I'll jump first, and I think Anna mentioned it already. I mean, I won't beat a dead horse, what we've already said about reducing emissions from power plants. But what would help climate change, and from an EJ perspective, is if we come up with solutions that reduce emissions from diesel-powered vehicles, because that contributes to local air pollution and disease and illness. But that would also reduce black carbon emissions, which contributes to climate change. So we need to come up with specific policies. And that's what we're talking about when we said we want to reduce emissions from mobile sources, but let's center policies that reduce those emissions and address EJ and equity at the same time. And let's make those our focus.
Okay, anyone else want to join in on opportunities?
Well, I'll second what Nikki said. I think that's a great opportunity, particularly right now with the ZEV, heavy duty and medium truck ZEV memorandum of understanding, because there's a lot of opportunities in this region. The VW money is supposed to be used for reducing nitrous oxide, and diesel produces a lot of that. It's also one of the places where the co-benefits from electrification of vehicles, the benefits in addition to greenhouse gas reduction in human health are the highest. So that's a tremendous opportunity. I think another is in the next year is, I think November 3rd is a big opportunity, and that will really affect the way that affect the trajectory of all the states, what happens on November 3rd.
I would just reiterate what I said earlier, which is, and we heard from Commissioner McCabe that DEP is in the process of developing regulations both for electric generating units and possibly other stationary sources and mobile sources with rules completed by I think talk about the first quarter of next year. So that's happening right now, and if people aren't already plugged into those proceedings, they should get plugged in. I think there are a number of opportunities there where, as DEP is looking to set appropriate regulations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that in the process we can also see benefits from reduced co-pollutants in EJ communities. So I think that's very near term, happening now, and we should all be really trying to get the most out of that process.
I just want to add to that, I think when we think about some of the projects we see moving forward, whether it's, highway widening or, development of gas-fired power plants, a lot of that's connected to this concept of we are in a recession right now. We're going to need, shovel-ready jobs. And it's tied to having, construction firms and construction workers feel like those are the jobs that they're ready to do. And so we're going to have to engage construction workers and construction firms to say, these are a better alternative. You can also do these jobs, right? It shouldn't be, we are prepared to do this, and therefore we're going to do, what we've always done. Let's help people transition. I know everybody knows this, but still, I think people get frustration around seeing the highway widening project and say, why? It's because it's a construction job that is going to help produce jobs for the state as it's coming out of a recession. That's just pure and simple. That's what it is. Might not be the most wonderful answer, but we need to acknowledge that's the reality and really do a better job of engaging construction firms and construction workers and professionals to say, how can we move forward on green jobs, green energy, green projects.
I think real quickly, another big challenge is getting people back to transit after COVID. And I think the more we can do to do that, because one reason we've seen a lot more traffic right now, and it will be used to justify building more roads, is people going back to cars who used to ride transit.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I'm very concerned about that. All right, I think at this time, we should wrap up our panel, and let me very sincerely thank all of you for participating. Thank you for your contributions to the Climate Change Alliance. It's an honor to work with each and every one of you. And we will now turn it over for our third panel. And before I do that, I do want to, I'd be remiss not to mention the incredible work of Gene Herb and Marjorie Kaplan, who are the heart and soul of the Climate Change Alliance. And before I turn it over to Mariana, I just want to very sincerely thank them. Yes, thank you for the applause. We should all applaud because they really are the backbone of the Alliance for the State and do tremendous, tremendous work. So at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to a longstanding colleague, Mariana Lechner, who's going to lead us in our third panel today. And please take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for wonderful sessions. Our final session for today is to provide you with information about some of the exciting areas underway by our current Alliance working group. So participants, stick around. We've got some good information coming up. Alliance participants establish working groups that can range from a focus on answering a very specific question to evaluating a broader landscape around an emerging issue that will lead to defining areas that are in need of further analysis. We want to use this session as an opportunity to get feedback for these working groups. So to that end, instead of Q&A, please type into the chat area under all panelists your thoughts about emerging issues that the working groups are considering, or provide feedback about what you have heard. We'll be sharing this information with the working group co-chairs. So I'd like to now invite our working group co-chairs to turn on their cameras and microphones as I introduce them. I see a few already have, which is fantastic. We have list off the 5 panelists first, and then we'll start with the presentations. First is Rob Freudenberg of the Regional Plan Association, who is co-chair of the Long-Term Adaptation Planning Working Group. We have Russ Furnari, PSEG Services Corporation, co-chair of the Natural and Working Lands Working Group. David Henry of the New Jersey Association of County and Local Health Officials, who is co-chair of the Public Health Working Group. Tony MacDonald of the Urban Coast Institute, Monmouth University, who is co-chair of the Offshore Wind Ecological Monitoring Working Group, and Mark Warner of Gable Associates and Charge EVC, who is co-chair of the Transportation Working Groups. Please, participants, remember to post comments in the chat box to make suggestions for these groups. So it looks like we've got everybody scrolled up and ready to go. We ask that you do mute your microphone until it's your turn to speak. It seems there's feedback through laptops. So we're going to start with Rob Freudenberg. So Rob Freudenberg of the Regional Plan Association, please go ahead and unmute and kick us off. Thank you, Rob.
Great. Thank you, Mariana, and good afternoon, everyone. I am speaking on behalf of my co-chair, Deb Lawler, and the talented members of the Long-Term Adaptation Planning Work Group. The purpose of this work group is to explore how planning efforts, policies, and investments in New Jersey can most adequately address long-term climate adaptation at the state and local levels. Now, we recognize, as we saw earlier, that the state is working diligently towards a coastal resilience plan and has taken important steps to reorganize to ensure its focus is on adaptation. At the same time, we know that government can only look at so much at one time and can only look so far. So our intent is to help fill gaps in this area and go further than government is able to go, and we have a great team of members to help us get there. Now, we had our first meeting earlier this month, and it was a really productive conversation about where we'd like to focus. Obviously, this is a big topic with multiple threads, so we want to be sure that we're focused where we can have the greatest impact. Before we discuss those major topic areas that our group will focus on, I wanted to share some of the insights from the group when asked what long-term adaptation means to them. I think it will help give you a sense of the kind of work we're looking to do. So one member defined long-term adaptation as planning for the end of the century and beyond. Another defined it as moving from a focus on protection to a focus on retreat. Others mentioned the importance of adaptation to be informed by continually refreshed science. Everyone mentioned the importance of focusing on both the state and local efforts. We truly are all in this together, and municipalities will need the technical and financial support to help them make the best decisions that they need to make on the ground. Finally, a few members also mentioned that while the focus is on the long term, the time to be having conversations and setting in place policies for the future is now. So to tackle this range of issues, we settled on 2 major areas of focus that we hope to make some progress on as well in the coming months. The first is metrics and targets. It's hard to know if we're succeeding in long-term planning if we don't have targets to aim for that have measurable indicators. So we're fortunate enough to have some research support in this area from Whale Pond, a Blasting grad student, who is scanning the field of long-term adaptation from local to regional and state to national and international efforts, find metrics and targets that we could recommend the state and localities look to adopt. These could range from targets like percentage of populations in high-risk flood zones to issues around inequity and social justice targets. There's a great opportunity here to be leading the way, and I think the metrics and targets are how we get there. Our second topic of focus falls under the banner of long-term planning, and it's focused specifically on issues around interagency coordination, as well as the increasingly important and necessary, but very difficult conversation around managed retreat. How can we start to have this conversation in a meaningful way? I'm glad to hear Brandon McCoy mention this topic in his comments earlier. How do we build on the success of Blue Acres, one of the nation's only statewide ongoing buyout programs? Whether periodic wildfires and storm surge or the more permanent flooding from sea level rise, circumstances finally forcing society to consider what was once the unthinkable. We will have to move. We want to offer constructive and thoughtful approaches for the state and municipality to grapple with this issue. Finally, our third topic revolves around adaptation funding. There's a lot we're going to need to do to adapt New Jersey's communities, and it's going to require significant investments. But this is money that we are largely not budgeting for or spending today. With many competing needs for state investment and a budget that never makes everyone happy, we will need to identify and create new and ongoing streams of funding for adaptation. We hope to build on the work of organizations and researchers examining this topic and offer some specific guidance to the state. So as you can see, we have managed to take on some critically important and pressing issues. We certainly value your feedback on the work we have set out to do, and we look forward to sharing our progress with you as we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Next up is Russ Furnari of PSEG. Russ, take it away.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of a group that's somewhat tied into the things that Rob was talking about with adaptation, but it's from a slightly different focus, where we have a work group that we're, in fact, still in the early stages of on natural and working lands and strategies that will put those lands to work as a benefit for developing climate mitigation as we go forward. One of the things we're going to be looking at with the natural lands is actually the different types of natural and working lands, incorporating a diverse land use around the state of New Jersey. Coastal areas, it'll look at marshes. In upland areas, it'll be looking at forested areas and natural uses of those forests where we can encourage practices that will focus on storing additional carbon or maintaining current levels of carbon storage. So we're looking at a variety of things. We have a large group that is currently coming together, which will in part put us in a position where we will develop some subgroups that will look at specific areas. So that's, if you're interested in those things, that's something that we would look for your questions on and your input too. A couple of the areas and things that we're going to be looking at are emerging research around potential mitigation strategies. We'll be looking for input from both some experts across the country, and also trying to learn from folks around the other states that have done things already in specific areas. We'll be looking at, particular things around what state groups in New Jersey are already doing, whether it's DEP and forestry efforts for forest stewardship, agricultural work that is being done and looked at through the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the NRCS folks on potential things that we could do from a standpoint of soil health and how to practices that will also provide some climate benefits. And also look at, within that, what are the things that are potentially changing because of the current cycle of climate impacts, as and how that's affecting both the current practices within agriculture and the types of agriculture that we do, and what maybe we will have to adjust to as we go forward. Things like some of our high level crops like cranberries and blueberries. Is that going to change? Are we going to have to adapt different things to either maintain those crops or improve their ability to adjust over time? But we also want to look at urban areas and urban open space and natural lands, lands that are being developed, such as the restoration of the Harrison landfill in Camden, Hawk Rise in Linden, and the historical work that's gone on in the New Jersey Meadowlands to take impacted areas and turn them into, productive natural lands and open spaces for both, climate benefits as well as recreational benefits for local residents, many of whom in those areas are impacted, in EJ communities that would benefit from a better, improved quality of life by having those natural areas that are working for climate mitigation, but also providing them with opportunities down the road. We're also looking to identify some gaps that might exist in the current knowledge of across the state, and looking at ways to apply some of the RGGI funds and things like that, and other sources of funding to those types of projects and reap the benefits of those funds, working with the communities that they will target.
Thank you very much, Russ. Next, we will hear from David Henry, representing the New Jersey Association of County and Local Health Officials. David?
Yes, thank you, Mariana. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm glad to be here today. I want to thank our main speakers from today for very interesting information and timely. Marjorie and Jean and Gary and my co-chair, George DiFerdinando. I'm speaking on behalf of our Health Officers Association, of which Megan Avalon is our president. We represent 99 local health departments in the state of New Jersey. As George had mentioned, we are fully engaged primarily in COVID activities now, but that's also part of climate change because we do communicable disease investigations and so forth. In regards to the Public Health Working Group, the group has been around for quite a number of years at the moment, and what happens is we started having stakeholder meetings for engagement back in 2013, and then in 2014 we had a working brief of climate impacts on health. And then each year following that, there have been reports on various public health and climate change interactions, whether it's vulnerable populations, convening climate change impacts, climate in 2017, Climate and Health Profile Report. And in 2019, last year, there was a convening of building capacity to address impacts of climate change on health inequities in New Jersey, along with New Jersey SOFI, which is the health educators. And then also in 2019, a rapid health impact assessment in regards to energy master planning and the opportunities to address health and health inequities. So basically, we've been mostly involved in identification of populations who are most vulnerable to climate change through data analysis and stakeholder engagement. And as we mentioned, these are reports we've generated through the hard work of the group and the organization so far. And the working group is also hosted a number of different initiatives. And in our most recent meeting that we had on July 1st, we were basically discussing some of the items and plans that we have currently and in the future, so that we will have a healthier, more resilient, environmentally sustainable, as well as a society that is just, in which the opportunities are available for all and the risk is equitably shared, I should say. And so some of the consistent findings we've had in this working group discussions is that climate change is and will continue to negatively impact the health of New Jerseyans. And while all New Jerseyans' health will be affected, the health of certain populations and communities is and will continue to be disproportionately affected, especially as we see in COVID and the EJ communities. And climate change makes some of these factors worse and contributes to the inequities in health. Populations and communities whose health is most affected are historically left out of the decision-making process. So that's something that we all have to work on to in that regard. And local health practitioners and health departments are already have strained capacities, but can and should lead local efforts to address climate change and public health. And there is much New Jersey can do to reduce the impacts of climate change on the health of the state. And now is the time to actually act. And then what happens is some of the categories of change that we mentioned, or the categories of needed action that's needed, are rapid health impact assessments, integrated planning efforts, health systems, health policy options, data and tools, and trying to address information gaps. And through some of these items and actions, we look to identify specific options that where state and local strategies can be applied. And we need to continue to communicate with policymakers, the public, leaders, and the media. So, to summarize, amidst all of these efforts, the working group continues to promote several priorities, including recognizing that we have enough information to act now, focusing on equity issues and populations most vulnerable, addressing the underlying causes that make some populations most vulnerable to climate change, and trying to lead to sustainable changes, expand the role of public health community in regards to New Jersey's climate change efforts, and assess impacts on our climate decisions on health early, and so we can ensure that there are appropriate and advanced health decisions that have equity as a goal. In summary, we're looking to for everybody to partner with us, because public health is everywhere, and we encourage more public health partners as we go on this road for improving climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That's close to my heart of emergency management. Next up, we have Tony MacDonald from Monmouth University. Tony, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and it's great to be with all of these colleagues and everybody participating. I think you can see that what we have in the Climate Change Alliance is a lot of people who are committed on the ground and working with a cross-section of communities to make the ambitious goals that the state has set out happen. So we really think we are doing some work around very particular issues that we think will actually help us to actually cross the finish line and get to success on some of these ambitious goals. The specific, I'm a bit of a different work group. The work group I was on is working on ecological monitoring and mitigation policies. A bit of a unique group. Thanks very much to Michael Allen, Dr. Allen from Rutgers, and Matt Campo particularly for actually writing a report. We actually developed a very specific report. So my report will be brief today because it's a detailed report on the Alliance's website, ecological monitoring and mitigation policies and practices at offshore wind installations in the US and Europe. The reality is, although we have ambitious goals for offshore wind, it's not going to happen and it's not going to have broad public support unless we do it in an environmentally and ecologically responsible and sustainable way. So this charge, this committee, and actually this report development was actually to help and work with Mike and Matt to actually draft a report for the consideration of DEP as they look at offshore wind so that they have the best information available to them about how to assess ecological impacts, both in terms of policies and practices and mitigation policy as well. So this report covers a lot of information and really is a resource for everybody on this call. We're reviewing it right now and we're looking for opportunities for how we would continue this discussion moving forward. But so you understand the process of this report, it reviews in detail 4 different states in the region, New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Connecticut, for their best practices and what they are currently doing around environmental monitoring or ecological monitoring and mitigation. It also looked at 3 leading countries in Europe, UK, Germany, and Denmark for their activities. They're considerably ahead of us on the curve in terms of actually operationalizing offshore wind facilities. So we think there's a lot to be learned from them. They also did 12 interviews with various experts, as well as a very extensive a 300 report bibliography on the state of the science. So really, there's a lot of information out there. And what this report attempts to do is try to really make that available to the state and to the stakeholders as well to understand what we should be considering as we think about setting up ecological monitoring in the state. So it focused on a variety of things, both, as I said, policies and plans, as well as the practice, what actually has been put into place in current projects that are up and running. So again, I indicated this is really to provide a framework for DEP. It really isn't a how-to, but it does provide a lot of information for them to consider as they move forward with their variations. So what they found is a variety of different things, and probably this is not going to be surprising to a lot of people on the call. They did realize, although there was a lot of information, as I've told you, that actually the current policies and practices are quite fractured. The reality is that actually there's, while we set out a broad brush to think about broad ecological considerations, many of the review processes are actually very specific to certain permit requirements or other issues. So we do recognize that there are certain different types of requirements that are coming out of specifically things like a BOEM's requirements for developing construction and operations plans, EIS requirements for specific state permits. There are a variety of different requirements, but they're not necessarily aligned broadly or connected to each other to be thinking about broader ecological impacts. And it's always a challenge in environmental considerations to consider cumulative impacts. And again, this is kind of unknown and unknowable. How many are there going to be? Where are they going to be? How do you actually assess the impacts on the ecology? Because unlike the specific project reviews, the environment is all connected. And this is a very complex environment. So we have a changing ocean that's compounded by climate changing. So it's a shifting baseline. This isn't putting something on a piece of land that you can map and do. It's constantly changing. And you can think about the 3 dimensions. It's got the bottom, it's got the water, and it's got the air. So it really is a very complex system of ecology and environment that really is not currently considered in an integrated way. So we do think that there are opportunities as well. Again, there's information and some get good practices. We have to figure out what the best practices are, and we figure out how to connect the dots across the different reviews. We do think there's an opportunity for regional coordination. we do think that looking across the states, and in addition to specifically near New Jersey state efforts this is focused on, there are opportunities perhaps with groups like the Mid-Atlantic Council on the Ocean to work with them to be thinking about comparing more specifically what the current requirements are. And also thinking not only requirements are, but what is beyond requirements? How do you really think about these things in a more comprehensive and holistic fashion about how they connect with each other? There are new groups being stood up, which we think will help consider some of these questions. There's the Regional Ocean Science Alliance and also Regional Wildlife Alliance. So there are groups specifically looking at sharing information across the region with stakeholder groups and experts and the companies themselves about what is needed and how do we make sure that we are transparent and clear so that the public has confidence in these facilities and that we understand really what the impacts will be. Again, the report has a lot of specific examples of this and some, not suggestions so much, but just lays out some ideas, I think, for consideration of the state, and we urge you to look at it. I would say there's also some other new challenges moving forward that the report indicates. One is that we have to recognize we also have rapidly emerging technologies to actually assess things. So we need to think not only what historic monitoring strategies has been, and there's a very great detailed analysis of some of the current practices for monitoring and mitigation. So it's not only a list of policies and plans, but specific practices that are underway across the states and what might be considered when you're trying to do monitoring. But it also does raise the prospect of how do we push new technologies and informations. How do we connect with groups like the Regional Ocean Observing Systems, which are Rutgers and some of our other universities are partners with? How do we think more about how we monitor these things, not only to get your permits, not only to get your environmental impact statements, but actually operationalize that data and information over the lifetime of the project? It shouldn't be something that we actually get some information, approve the permit. So there's a big call as well in this report to be thinking about how do we collect and manage data in an integrated way so that we can learn from the information that we gathered, both in the initial characterizations, the actual operations plans, and as they move forward. So again, we urge you to look at the report and please give us any comments or suggestions you may have if we've missed anything, and stay tuned as we consider whether and how this work group might move forward after this report. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. And Marjorie has put the web links for the report in the chat box so everybody can look it up and refer to it. We're rounding out our session with Mark Warner from Gable Associates in charge EDC. So Mark, please take it away.
Thank you, Mariana, and good afternoon to everybody. I'd like to share with you where we are in our transportation working group, and I'm speaking for the working group and my co-chair, Gary Sondermeyer. So as the steering committee started thinking about the new sets of working groups we wanted to put together, as you heard in our first session this afternoon, transportation is a huge component of climate impact as well as public health impacts. And so we wanted to explore doing new work in transportation in a way that would be meaningful. The steering committee immediately realized that there were a couple of challenges. First of all, this is a very, very large and diverse area. Second of all, we needed to scope this in a way that we could really make a meaningful impact, given the resources that the working group would have to work with in a meaningful period of time. And we also recognize that there's just a massive amount of work going on in transportation at the current time. And so we didn't want to duplicate existing efforts and so on. So we decided to take a two-step process. The first step would be to assemble a small, in essence, scoping working group that would take this very, very broad area called transportation and narrow it down into something that would be feasible and impactful and meaningful. And then based on those guidelines and a charter, if you will, or guardrails, then convene a second working group that would then dig in to pursue that effort. So Gary Sondermeyer and I led that first working group, basically the scoping working group. To be honest, given the challenges of the last couple of months, we even had trouble getting meetings of that group together. So what we did was do some surveys combined with a variety of one-on-one discussions with various team members. And what we got back from that exploratory exercise was, number one, as we had suspected, there was an incredibly broad and diverse set of perspectives about what transportation means everything from doing more R&D on advanced biofuels to changing the way we zone residential properties versus where people work, and everything in between. It was also clear that there was a lot of passion around these different elements, and as part of that, there really wasn't much consensus about where we should be prioritizing. And the third one actually was the most valuable, which was we found that a lot of people, especially folks working specifically outside the transportation area, were really not aware of all the things that were going on in New Jersey regarding recent policies, recent initiatives by the agencies, various studies that were going on, and so on. So we brought those preliminary results back to the steering committee, had some further discussions, and the outcome was some consensus that we should, at least for the short term, for the next several months or so at least, focus on a program that would let us monitor what's going on in New Jersey, let everybody learn more about what's going on in New Jersey, and to socialize what's going on in New Jersey so that we would be better prepared to define a charter that made sense and then focus our efforts on feeding into an activity where we could really make a difference. So that's what we're focusing on doing now. The next step for this effort is to try and convene a first meeting of this new transportation working group with that monitor, learn, and socialize objective, and get some efforts in place over the next few months to do that in the transportation area. And then once we've done that, figure out what the next step would be from there, given conditions in the state at the time. So again, this is a new working group. We've still got a lot of work to do to try and get started and focused on the right priorities. And then that's where we are. So I'll just leave it at that, given the late hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I want to thank Mark, David, Tony, Russ, and Rob for your presentations and the work that you're doing with the working groups. I hope all the participants can check out the Alliance website for that and other work. And I'd like to personally thank Marjorie, Jean, and Matt for such a wonderful event. So now we're going to turn it back over to Marjorie Kaplan to wrap it up for us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mariana. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Great. So thanks on behalf of the Alliance. Thank all our speakers and our sponsors and all of you who have participated, providing your thoughts and your inputs throughout our conversation today. We promise we'll take it back. We also invite you to join us at 10 a.m. on Friday, October 2nd, when the Alliance will continue with part 2 of this year's theme of New Jersey leading the way on climate change solutions. It's going to be very exciting. You can participate in a virtual dialogue with 3 former New Jersey governors, Governors Kane, Florio, and Whitman, in a conversation about opportunities for leadership, learning from the past to inform the future. That event is co-sponsored by the Eagleton Institute of Politics Center on the American Governor. That event, again, is free, but you have to register to attend. So thank you very much. This event has been filmed, and this plus Commissioner McCabe's slides will be available on our website. That concludes today's event. We are adjourned. Thank you.